This is Tweet Street Satirical Saltire, broadcasting to you for unoccupied Scotland,
Oh, Florida,
amplifying women's voices and saying women
when
won't waste.
will we see
This is Tweet Street Satirical
our
Saltire,
like
broadcasting to you
again?
for unoccupied. Welcome along to Tweet Street Scotland Occupied, or Tweet Street Occupied Scotland, everyone. I'm Simon Bridges, aka Peter. With me this morning, as usual, is my co-host, Jamie Whitesnake. All right, John, how you doing, buddy?
No bad, Peter. Good to see you again.
And you, unusual to be kind of up at this, well, no, up at this time in the morning, but recording at this time in the morning, but we make exceptions for exceptional guests. So that leads us on nicely to Mr. NealeHanvey. How are you doing, sir?
I'm very good. Peter. Thank you very much for inviting me along.
Ah, you're welcome. You're welcome. No, I'm just going to tell a wee story about how we got you along in the end, because Neil and I were kind of doing a wee bit of messaging, direct messaging, trying to arrange a time and what have you, and it just didn't work out. I not understand Neil's a very busy man, but it just didn't work out. And then I was away to a rally in Edinburgh, the one for when they were going to put restrictions around about the Parliament building so that it made it illegal. So and Neil was there, done a great speech and that, but afterwards I was making my way back to the car and my feet get really sore, John. So when I'm kind of I'm in a hurry usually to get back to it, and I noticed somebody sitting outside in a cafe, and I just says, "Oh, when are you going to appear on the podcast?" Just like that. And Neil, quite the thing, bounced up off his chair, as welcoming as ever, and started across and says, "We need to try and arrange this." So thanks very much. Sorry for alarmed you on the way by that morning, or that afternoon actually, but thanks very much for agreeing to do it. We're going to ask you some questions if you don't mind, because politics is rearing its ugly head in Scotland at the minute, and there's some alarming things. First of all, I want to pay my respects and rest in peace to Sarah Everard. What happened there was appalling. The fact that it was a Metropolitan police officer, I know it's not in Scotland, however, it's something that's got to be mentioned. Neil, can I get your thoughts on that, please?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that, because I'm the reason I was a couple of minutes late joining you was because I was in the middle of writing a column piece on violence against women, effectively, but framing it from the perspective of the Commissioner Alex comments that, you know, effectively it was kind of her fault because she allowed the police officer to arrest her. And, you know, I think that's just an expression of the problem that we have in society about violence against women and girls, that there's this what seems to be a completely unconscious response from many men to begin to blame the victim, however clumsy that comes out. And of course, it completely misses the point of the role of power and coercive control and the psychological elements of violence against women. And, you know, to use a feminist word, the patriarchy's influence on subverting women and their voice. So I think there's a huge amount to come out of this case, which is beyond tragic, that someone would abuse a position of trust in such a violent way and take the life of a young woman who was just living her life and doing anything that any reasonable person would do. And to be in any way to lay even a grain of blame anywhere near her door is completely abhorrent.
Aye, that's the second. I've been appalled to read. I read her mother's victim statement, and you know, I felt sick reading it. It was hitting me in the guts with the comment that I was getting past, and to hear, I mean, some of the appalling flagging of us. It's just shit. There's no other word for it. It's just deflection, trying to get away from the fact that a serving metropolitan police officer with links to like these WhatsApp groups that they keep on mentioning. That I mean, in Scotland, you've got the GRA getting forced upon us, and I mean that's going to for me that's going to create more issues. You've got the First Minister coming out and disagreeing with the experts. You know, this person who thinks at a higher intellect level disagrees with experts. I mean, where are we going? It worries me for where we're going, Neil, for Scotland.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I should get my cards on the table straight away and say, you know, I support a reform to GRA that makes life easier for trans people to be visible and to be integrated in society and to be celebrated. And I don't think I've met a single person who has concerns about the current legislation who would disagree with that fundamental principle. And I think it's also important to say in 2012, after the equal marriage campaign was concluded, I attended the Equality Network's event and supported a move to for GRA reform. What I didn't anticipate was the way in which that would be used to introduce self-ID with a completely unregulated process that would allow any male who wanted access to women's safe spaces to be able to self-identify and gain access to them. That is, you know, not for any kind of transphobic purposes, but that's just because, and you look at the Sarah Everhard case and think that is a crazy notion that we would have all of these safeguarding practices for professions such as nursing, medicine, sports coaches, priests. You know, all of those different parts of our society have a responsibility to comply with safeguarding measures. And what we're saying is that there's a section of society that doesn't have to comply with the same rigor that the rest of us willingly sign up to because it's for the greater good. And we prevent the introduction of risk of harm, not just to women's safe spaces, but to the trans community, because there's a risk that if that community is infiltrated by nefarious people, then they will become the victims and the target for any kickback. So, you know, for me, you know, I voiced my concerns about this during the selection process in 2019. That was fed up through the party quite swiftly, and you know, I then found myself being accused of anti-Semitism and you know, drummed out of, or attempted to drum me out of my constituency vote, and you know, then I got back into the party, and still, you know, I wish independence was the primary purpose, but it seems to be GRA is the primary purpose. And the final point I'd make, which goes back to the question I think you were asking, Peter, which is looking at psychological violence against women. One of the key components is the gaslighting, brainwashing, dehumanizing elements that removes a woman's belief that there is something not right here. And I have a fundamental problem with the approach of both the First Minister and the Scottish Government to this whole debate, because the message that they're giving to women is that you're a bit mad, your voice isn't valid, we're not going to listen to you, away. And, you know, and you know, when I'm looking at the evidence of that pattern of psychological violence against women, I can see elements of that in the way the Scottish Government has approached this by refusing to speak to For Women Scot and various other interested, you know, fundamentally interested parties. So, you know, whilst I've had a tough time, it is nothing in comparison to what some women go through. And I, you know, I have no regrets ever about speaking up and in a forthright way about the risks to women.
Aye, again, Neil, I second what you're saying. If we go back thinking about it, links in the first question as well. If we go back to growing up with three sisters, and you need to look, you need, I always hear whenever they were going out somewhere, my dad and mum giving them that warning, you need to watch this, you need to watch that, and why do men not need to watch? Why no educate? It's like, and I've seen something on Twitter like, educate your daughters, no, educate your sons. Educate your
Absolutely.
sons,
Yeah.
to think differently, and you know what the difference between right and wrong, and interpret how I know it's a hard task to ask, however, it's
Mm.
damn well worthwhile taking on, in my opinion. No, well, no rubbish the women's rights. There's three men sitting at a game talking about women's rights, which is another thing. There should be more women involved. So to kind of pay full attention to that, but leave it there and we'll move on to the next part. And again, it's about the Scottish Government, Neil. And you mentioned independence. I know John's got a keen interest in independence like myself, but there was something that happened yesterday with the vaccine passport app. I'd seen you'd made a wee comment on. Can you give your thoughts on that, mate?
Well, I mean, I'm not in favour of piecemeal vaccine passports because I don't think, based on my professional background, I don't think that as a single strand of action they are particularly meaningful or that they'll be particularly effective. You know, and I've gone over this so many times now with my attempts to influence the Scottish Government, both out with and within the SNP. And, you know, I couldn't, as an SNP MP and one of the health representatives at Westminster, I couldn't even get a phone call back from the SPADs in Holyrood to talk about my concerns about the end of lateral flow devices, for example, which was one of my early concerns. So unless you've got a robust strategy across all three principal strands, so the treatment modalities, the non-pharmaceutical interventions like masks and hand washing and social distancing and the like, and that you're keeping a really close eye on how the virus is behaving, both in the way that it spreads, but also in the way that it adapts and mutates, then these kind of measures don't really help because they can't predict without that information. So it's a bit like, so if you're a patient of mine, Peter, and I want to know what's happening with you, I take your basic, I do maybe do other things, but the basic things, I take your temperature, your pulse and your blood pressure and how fast you're breathing. And if I do that regularly and something happens to you and I can chart how that's changed, then I can make decisions based on that information and come to conclusions about what's wrong with you and what action needs to be taken. If you don't do those observations and you become unwell, I'm guessing. And guessing is never a good place to be. And introducing a measure without robust data to underpin it is not a good place to be. And so it's a simple analogy, but I think it's a reasonably straightforward one for folk to get. And so it's a bit like giving somebody or putting in place a restrictive measure on somebody's behavior for their health reasons without really understanding what's wrong with them.
I mean, you've got that, and then you've got the added extras. You can only get it if you've got a smartphone and like passport, driving license, and it's like, again, it's dividing the classes. John, over to you, mate. You've not said much with it.
I know, there's a point I want to make about that Sarah Everhart case as well. There's a certain TV celebrity who makes a living from getting involved in the properties game, and she basically put a tweet out saying that she's basically trying to blame the part of the tragedy on having a lockdown. Whether you're pro-lockdown or anti-lockdown, it has nothing to do with that poor lassie's case. And it's absolutely awful what happened to that poor soul. But for media celebrities to try and make traction at that for their own pet project, I think is appalling. She deleted the tweet afterhand, but it just gives you an insight into what their thought is. It's how can I twist this to what my political agenda is or my thoughts are. You know, I think that was appalling. But that was that part. Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, you're absolutely dead right, John. The circumstances were the ones that presented to her killer at that time, and any notion that it was a consequence of lockdown is ludicrous. He was determined to find a way to capture a victim and carry out the heinous crime that he did perpetrate, and he would have found a way in any way. You know, it was an opportunistic situation, and I don't think that is a helpful approach to deal with such a difficult and sad situation.
That was Kirsty Allsop. For anybody who didn't see it, I don't mind naming names. It was Kirsty Allsop that tweeted that. For anybody who didn't catch that one, I thought it was appalling, John, as you say. Like, I mean, I've seen a number of tweets that are questionable at best, but I've seen more than I would like to that have actually appalled me for the situation. And again, some of which come from places that you would think would be more in touch with the sensitivities of the case as it was. And that's what's alarmed me. It's been a bit of an eye-opener. I mean, we're already struggling as it is after Brexit with everything that Brexit has brought or not brought in most cases. But we've also got the things that are happening that are a direct impact to Scotland, even with the denial of democracy across the mainstream media and across the place that you frequent most of all, Neil, is your day-to-day job down at Westminster. We've now had another peer hoofed upon us from yesterday, Malcolm Offord, who was the man that done the 2014 or lead up to the 2014 video on servile Scots, basically, who like it fitted like a good cup of hot chocolate. My arse, right? Again, it shows how highly Scotland's thought of for this perspective, John. Did you see that yesterday?
Yeah, I've seen bits on Twitter as well. I've seen a couple of good tweets about it, but he's basically bought influence, bought his way in. He was rejected at the ballot box, and he's basically used money donated to the Conservative Party to buy a position in the Scottish office, which can now influence laws, procedures, and everything that runs in a day-to-day life in Scotland, including all the powers that are getting grabbed back anyway. So it just highlights what British democracy deposits on Scotland, and it's brown and it stinks.
Neil, what's your take on it? Being a wee bit closer than what we are.
Well, I mean, you know, the fact that the amount of money that he paid into the Conservative Party as a donation, that donation will be recouped in short order from his expenses in the Lords. So it's a bit of a cheap ticket into a lifetime of a gravy train. I mean, I absolutely have a not settling in, settling up mentality when I go there. I'm not interested in ingratiating myself with anyone. I'm absolutely committed to achieving Scottish independence. It is frustrating that some of my former colleagues in the SNP seem very comfortable with the arrangement that they've got, and I've spoken, you know, many times about my frustration of the lack of action there. But you know, the Lords is the Lords. It's what we've got at the moment. It's what we're subjected to. I mean, this is just shocking. You know, that somebody can donate effectively a small amount of money to a political party to get access to one of the cushiest clubs in the country is dreadful. But what it also does is there are some people who occupy seats in the Lords, and whether I agree with the establishment or not, who are incredibly hardworking, diligent and community-focused people. Now, we might not agree with how much money they get and all that kind of stuff, but it really, I think it really belittles the effort that they have made throughout their life in their attempt to improve the lives of others. In often selfless ways, that somebody can be ushered in to that club, you know, on the back of really very little by way of societal contribution. So I think there's quite a few different angles to it. You know, I've got a good relationship with some people in the Lords who've been very supportive of initiatives that I've introduced and have been supportive when I've taken concerns to them. But there are others that well, I probably better not complete that sentence. There are others.
That's a very good place to leave it there, actually.
There's a
So,
question, Neil. There's a question I'd like to ask Neil. It's always been in my mind, and it's ever since even pre-2014, when the referendum and that happened, and I'm talking particularly about the SNP in general, but why do Scottish politicians, I've always found the SNP to be too weak at the responding to the challenges they get and the lies that get forced upon them. And why don't they refer more to the UN Charter of being able to choose your government of your choice by the people? You know, why don't we talk about the claim of right more? They never seem to use these historical, factual claims to Scottish, to be Scottish, to be independent, to have your own right to choose your own political path. Why is that not used as more of an instructional method to get the message across to people in Scotland who don't know enough about independence to vote for it?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and it goes back to the comments I made a wee moment ago, which was when I got to Westminster, and you know, most of the SNP group were supportive of me and friendly. Some of them, I think, were actually just trying to get me to say something outrageous so they could run off to the press and dinghy me again. But you know, you live and learn, and I thankfully I didn't rise to the bait, because what I think they wanted me to say, I wasn't going to say anyway, because I wouldn't have. But when I did get back into the SNP group, I kind of expected, well, what I expected was not what I saw. So I expected independence to underpin every argument and every action that we took. And what I witnessed was a group of people, predominantly, not all, you'll know who I mean when I say not all, but who were content to play the Westminster game. And a lot of the conversation was about what Jacob said, you know, Jacob Rees-Mogg, and I just kind of have an aversion to being on a pally terms with people who really are content to keep us under the heel, and so I was disappointed that those types of arguments did not form part. I mean, you can get the rhetoric, Scotland will not this, Scotland will not that, but unless you're actually going to do something on the back of that will not, it becomes, I think, as many who really pay attention have decided, it just becomes empty words and a bit cringeworthy. You know, I mean, Kenny and I are doing our very best to try and redress that balance, and we've been, I think, provocative when necessary and challenging, and certainly we've got a great membership in the Alpha Party ready to help us on serious matters with the Constitution. Now we have to make sure that we've got our argument right before we strike, but we're starting from now. What I hoped I would find when I got into the SNP group was that work had been done. We had our argument square. We knew where we were going. We knew what plan B was. We knew what plan A was, and I didn't get a sense of any of that.
Well, I think the mandates that have been given for independence, I mean, they're quite clear, and if you have you anyway, Neil. Now, some words, I'm going to pick up on some words that you'd said there about cringeworthy, etc. There was a statement that was caught on a microphone during the week, because we like to do a wee bit of Tory bashing here, right? This is I'm going to do a wee screen share here. This is a colleague of yours down the road in that hive of scum and villainy that you frequent quite regular, who was caught on mic. You can give me your thoughts on this.
Yeah, just your opinion in the Labour Party. Now we get the Conservative Party conference, and the deputy leader of the Labour Party called the Tories scum. That was also just used to sort of manipulate some headlines, but my take in it, and I didn't watch his speech, the Labour Party leader, but basically what he was basically saying is he's a comfortable, safe pair of hands for whenever the Tories can't get away with it anymore, and the elites in England feel safe that their offshore money and their comfortable lives are never going to be under a threat from any sort of Labour government in the future. What's your take on Keir Starmer?
I don't know, I'm getting a feedback. I don't really know him. So I can't talk about him personally, but certainly I think he's missed so many real opportunities where he's kind of started the argument, but he doesn't finish it, and he doesn't land a blow, and he doesn't put forward any credible alternatives. But, you know, I think there's a fundamental problem with Labour since Blair, which is the Labour Party doesn't know what it is, and it can't explain what it is to anyone. And that is fundamentally why they are where they are, both in Scotland and down south. And that's a real shame, because there are some Labour MPs like Sarah Owens, Barbara Keeley, and others that I have great political affinity with. They stand for some very similar social policies that I stand for, and there are others in a similar vein. But the party itself is so, I think, stuck on triangulation that it doesn't actually have a belief. It has a focus group, and the focus group tells it what it believes. And I don't think politics works like that. And and it may, I've had my share of political fisticuffs over the last couple of years, and what's really important to me is, my mum's old phrase, when I turn up my toes. When I turn up my toes, I want to be able to look back in my life and think I made the right decision for the right reasons. Whatever the consequences, I couldn't have yielded. I couldn't have bent a different way. And I think that's fundamentally the problem with the Labour Party, is that they don't know who they are, and they don't know the reason for the decisions that they're making. And that's a fundamental problem. Whereas Boris Johnson and his crowd know exactly what they want. They know exactly what the purpose is. They're prepared to say anything to get it. And it's very difficult for the Labour Party to counter that when you're dealing with such naked populism. And and I think the problem's the same in Scotland. No amount of smiling and talking about poverty is going to wash with the Scottish people from Labour. They had 50 years to sort that out, and they didn't improve anything. And it's a bit like the SNP on independence. If you're going to do the job, do it. If you're just going to talk about it, move over.
That's it. There's always somebody there that's willing to do the job that you're only willing to talk about. Right. So we're back on track again. I'm going to do this wee screen share. Here we go, guys.
You cannot get any worse than a bunch of scum, homophobic, racist, misogynistic, banana republic, child nasty, Etonian privileged piece of scum.
This is what we call a mother job.
Right, so we'll leave it at that now, right? So that was what John was referencing there, Neil. The scum Tories was Angela Rayner. It was quite an open opinion sharing moment that she's doubled down on. She's not going back on, and I need to commend her because there's a majority of the country that she lives in, and there's a majority of this country that believe that to be true, especially when they don't feed kids, and especially when they lie consistently in order to get where they want to be, which is always seems to be detrimental to Scotland. Do you agree with that, or disagree, or your own thoughts there, Neil?
Yeah, well, I'm going to take it a step back from those particular comments. I don't think, I'm not going to endorse a Labour politician's words, but what I would say is it's hard to comprehend any reasonable outrage to a word such as that against anyone who supports or perpetrates the kind of poverty-inducing, policies that we've seen certainly over the last 12 years of Conservative rule, and throughout my younger years during Thatcherism and the destruction of communities all around Fife. So I understand completely the emotion that provokes that kind of language. But what I would say is, so it's more of a question. So the word scum they find offensive because it's an expression of a deeply held emotional view of the pernicious policies that they perpetrate. But the Conservatives are themselves, and neoliberalism more generally, thrives on labelling people as work shy, skivers, junkies, wasters. That is the engine room of their policy. So they label parts of our communities, so people who have fallen on the hardest of times, who have no sense of hope in their future and turn to drink and drugs because the social policies they've chosen have brought them to their knees. Let's be absolutely clear. Thatcherism and austerity drive people to despair, to hopelessness. And the only way that they can soothe that pain is by getting a bag of heroin or a litre bottle of vodka and just getting rid of the pain. That is why, we need a completely different approach to drug and alcohol misuse, a much more supportive and nurturing approach. But you can't fix that just by decriminalising possession. You've got to make serious inroads to tackling the causes of poverty. So to go back to the scum thing, if you don't like labels, stop using them. Stop calling people wasters and junkies and alkies and all of those really shaming names that are intended to exclude and dehumanize. So if you don't like it, don't do it.
That's a very good way to bring us towards the end of the show. There, Neil. So before we go, I wanted to ask, what can we expect to see from you in the near future?
Well, I'm having a very unusual occurrence. Only the second time since I've been elected, I'm having a week off. So I'm actually going away somewhere in Scotland with the family for a wee break, and I can't wait for that. But we've been working very hard in the background, developing on the back of conference, and you'll have seen that from the work that we've done on the laws to prohibit demonstrations outside Parliament. Kenny and I have really put the effort in there. We're still open to SNP colleagues supporting that resolution, bringing that to Parliament for a debate and a meaningful vote. There's nothing to prevent them doing that up until I think it's early November. I'm grateful to Joanna and Douglas, who both signed that resolution. This is not about party politics. This is absolutely about Scotland. So people want to be stronger for Scotland. Well, now's the time. But we're also looking at, we've got the 5-point plan to tackle poverty. We'll be continuing to push and pursue those policies and hopefully influence the Scottish Government and local authorities to look very seriously at their responsibility to tackle poverty. And that includes the Scottish Government not mitigating. If we're going to be under Westminster rule forever and a day, then you can talk about mitigating the cut to universal credit and working tax credits. If we're going to have a referendum at the end of 2023, then it's not mitigation, it's planning for that independent future. So wipe away the impact of that by increasing the Scottish Child Payment to £40 a week. That will sort that out straight away, and then we can start to build on the other anti-poverty initiatives and start making our communities properly stronger, where people don't have to resort to drugs because the pain of their life is so intense.
Aye, here. Right, just this is the final bit before we go then. So we're doing a wee screen share here. This is just a wee attempt to try and be funny, Neil. I hope you take it away, man. I'm glad you wore that shirt today, by the way. I'm so glad you wore that shirt today. Right, seen as well, governed by Muppets, right? This is a wee something for you.
And when Kermit the Frog sang, "It's not easy being green.
I'm too sexy for my shirt. Too sexy for my shirt. So sexy it hurts.
Thank you so much for agreeing to do Tweet Street. Have a wee word with Alex Salmon. We're trying to do a Christmas special and we want to feature Alex. So if you can,
Okay.
we've got people working on it. So any weight that could be added to that, Neil, would be absolutely great. And it's just a
I'll
half
certainly
hour.
see what I can do.
It's just a half hour, just like this, just a chat about Christmas special. And it'll be mainly featured around about the Alaba party. So it'd be great if he was the main guest.
Okay. I'll see him tomorrow at the NEC. So
Oh, brilliant! Oh, but
if I get a second to get to ask him, I'll certainly try my very best.
Thank you so much. So thanks for everybody at Tweet Street, Neil, for myself, Cinnamon Bridges, for Jamie Whitesnake. You want to say good night, John?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time, Neil. Have a good wee break, mate. You deserve it.
Thanks
Enjoy
very
your-
much, guys.
Catch you
Take
later.
care
Thank
now. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
There's some businesses, but
I've given you the most important metric, which is, never mind life expectancy, never mind, cancer outcomes. Look at wage growth.
I am so sorry.
This is Tweet Street Satirical Saltire, broadcasting to you for unoccupied Scotland. Amplifying women's voices and saying women won't waste. This is Tweet Street Satirical Saltire, broadcasting to you for unoccupied Scotland. Amplifying women's voices and saying women won't waste.